sustainability projects are always challenging to balance against other competing financial investments. The bedrock of energy sustainability is still grounded on consuming less and being as efficient and cost effective as possible in terms of what you do consume.
Extreme weather events are really hitting home for companies that their assets, their business plans are being impacted by climate change as it's happening now, and that's going to continue to happen over the years ahead. The ultimate game here is about limiting global temperatures.
Welcome to the latest Talking Power podcast, a collaboration between EDF and The Energist. I'm Tim McMahon-Smith, editor of The Energist. I'm joined today by Ed Mitchell and Tom Thackeray from EDF. Ed.
So hi there, Tim. I'm one of the senior managers in the large business team at EDF. I've been with the company for about 13 years now, and in the very distant past worked as a sustainability project manager within the central government department.
And Tom?
Hi Tim, I'm the head of strategy and sustainability at EDF. I've had a whirlwind first year in the company, working on strategic projects at the centre of the corporate function and also working on EDF's UK sustainability strategy, and it's been fascinating doing that. Before joining EDF, I worked for a number of years in political communications and representing businesses on their decarbonisation strategies.
Thank you. Has the push towards net zero emissions and it being underpinned by UK law meant that it's now significantly easier to get the ear of the board when getting sustainability projects off the ground, particularly regarding consent and finance?
I think largely, yes. I think the UK stole a march, sort of on the rest of the world when it came to establishing its net zero target in law. It's always been very well regarded, I think, in terms of that rule of law, having the institutional frameworks, things like the Climate Change Committee, which holds government's feet to the fire when it comes to the policy environment. And it has a good record when it comes to cutting emissions, particularly from the power sector. So I think definitely here in the UK, we saw a big shift in the corporate community as well, in establishing their own net zero targets, particularly in the run-up to COP26. So it felt like there's a real sense of momentum there. And you had things like the Race to Zero campaign, which is the UN's campaign which tracks corporate commitments and also government and different entities' commitments to net zero. And you can see that now that list is totally dominated by UK-headquartered firms because of that momentum that was built up to COP26. Obviously, I think we've had a few tough trading years over the last few years when you look at the pandemic fallout, which lasted longer than we'd thought, and then the energy crisis, obviously, and the high inflation environment that we've had. So implementation of those plans and some of the capital commitments which are associated with the shift to net zero for some industries has been challenging. And I think businesses since then have really had their head down and trying to make them a reality. So it's gone from that sort of aspirational target setting mode to the actual delivery mode, which of course is often much more challenging. I'd say also that the whole sort of regulatory environment has ratcheted up a notch for business as well, and that means that they have to talk about what they're doing on sustainability more frequently. And obviously annual reports, annual accounts are signed off through the finance line of a business, which ultimately makes the finance team, the CFO in business, much more interested in what's going on in sustainability as well, which I think is a good thing.
And Ed, what are your experiences in this area?
Yeah, so I think from a customer's point of view and the customers we work with, sustainability projects are always challenging to balance against other competing financial investments. I think for most of our customers, energy's always been a top 5 spend category, so certainly had a level of attention. But as Tom said, the energy crisis probably elevated that towards familiarity with the larger challenges we face as a country. I think standalone projects, if in terms of getting those away, they still prove challenging. We work with a lot of customers to ensure they take the preparatory steps with their board to ensure they understand what an energy project will take. We kind of set out the foundations for success when they're building that business case. But ultimately, we tend to see financial motivation be the overriding feature of most projects that get the go-ahead and get delivered.
But is that increasing now because of the net zero thing, more being green lit than perhaps in the past?
I think so. I think there's other motivations at play. Timing's obviously an important one. So obviously the energy crisis has kind of spurred people into action that perhaps they were waiting on taking, seeing what else was developing in the market. We're obviously moving towards a greener energy mix in our overall kind of energy landscape. So perhaps that's just been elevated by the financial kind of incentives for doing and taking action.
I mean, do you think that in the rush to talk about net zero, AI, microgrids, on-site generation, that there's the potential to overlook some of the basics such as energy efficiency and energy saving?
Yeah, I think the development of innovative technologies and the promises of what a future fully decentralised smart grid's going to deliver for us are obviously exciting. But like the bedrock of energy sustainability is still grounded on consuming less and being as efficient and cost effective as possible in terms of what you do consume. I think every customer we deal with is definitely at a different stage of their net zero journey. Some of them fully committed to delving into every traditional opportunity possible and delivering significant change, and have now set themselves up to benefit from the developing prominence of on-site generation and flexibility and the like. Some have been probably more balanced and focused on core business operations, and some just don't have the resources specifically looking at energy efficiency. I think wherever you are in that journey, there's more of the fundamentals that you can focus on and do. You know, we work with, for example, some major water utility companies who we're in conversations with them about some large-scale corporate power purchase agreements, but they've also at the same time got a team of engineers travelling around their sites with the sole purpose of finding efficiencies in terms of things like system and pump setting adjustments. I mean, we tend to find for that type of micro and macro level focus is the best route to delivering real consumption reductions, and why we try to offer customers an all-encompassing product suite. Just needing procurement support on a particular product, others a more kind of comprehensive suite.
Yeah, and Tom, what's your experiences in energy efficiency?
Yeah, I think companies need to consider the whole gamut of things that can help them lower their emissions, become more sustainable as companies, and these things oscillate depending on external conditions. Availability of skills, for example, can be quite a deciding factor. You know, where these investments, how they stack up against other things that companies are investing in, you know, whether you're doing an IT transformation project at the same time, you know, we've seen actually that investment has been quite constrained in recent years. So the companies being selective, I suppose, about what meets the bar, given uncertain times that we live in. I think, again, I think regulation has helped highlight for companies where opportunities to make savings materialise. So things like the Energy Savings Obligations Scheme puts a regular sort of energy audit practice into companies, and that scheme's now being given more teeth, which means it's not just about sort of auditing your energy use, but also coming up with a real life action plan for how you bear down on the energy use where that's possible. So again, sort of transparency, reporting is starting to make a difference, I think, in this space as well.
So you think that's making it move from perhaps a tick box exercise to actual results on the ground?
Yeah, I think definitely it was possible to comply with ESOS in a tick box way. I think the recent modifications that are coming in, I think, will encourage it and take it a step further when it comes to actual tangible action. I think the other thing I'd say is that when we look at EDF as a business, when we're taking on sustainability projects, we look at different criteria for actually doing it. And it could be pure results in terms of emission saving or commercial impact, cost savings. I think one that's often overlooked is the ability to engage with your staff. So we look at sustainability initiatives that mean something to people in their everyday jobs. So you talk about business travel, for example. If every business unit has an understanding of what they're spending in cash terms, but also what they're spending in terms of carbon on their business travel, and you sort of create that competition about driving it down over time, I think it helps for people to buy into the overall mission and feel like they have some agency in its delivery.
Mm-hmm. I mean, how can we move away from reporting and measurement towards concrete action on sustainability, especially regarding retrofitting solutions to existing buildings?
I suppose there's a few different ways of looking at action on retrofitting. Some of it's relatively passive. I mean, when we look at our portfolio, we generally see a bit of a decrease in consumption across the portfolio over time, year on year, 1% or 2%. And that's kind of basic consumption on core equipment, IT, white goods, lighting, HVAC. Inherently becoming more efficient, and BMS systems, the way in which they manage and monitor a site become more effective. It generally covers probably more generic electricity consumption. I think retrofitting on more substantial equipment, or actually changing energy intensive manufacturing industrial processes, is probably much of a harder challenge to face. I suppose with every business case, it's based upon data, and therein poses the other challenge. Despite cost comparative charging, offer of kind of development and deployment management support, out of hours appointments. We still experience resistance to things like smart meter conversion, obviously underpinning a lot of what we're trying to get to as a country in terms of our smart grid. And without the resulting data from those types of things, pricing opportunities of half-hourly data can bring, it's difficult to build that compelling case.
Have you found that by having robust net zero targets backed up by concrete action is making EDF a more attractive employer in the eyes of potential recruits?
I think my experience is yes. My team produces an update on sustainability every year, which is quite a pithy summary, I suppose, of what we're doing as a business, the things that we're trying to achieve, the targets that we have, our progress. And we did some stakeholder consultation on its use. Before you do that kind of document, you want to know who's using it and its value. And one of the highest sort of readerships of it was from prospective candidates for jobs at EDF. So we sort of know that candidates are seeking out this information before they come in for an interview. And of course, they want to learn about the company, but also want to be reassured, I think, for themselves that we have a clear purpose, that we're taking these things seriously. I think the net zero target in itself is almost like a hygiene factor. It's an expectation for a candidate that, you're, as a company, you're taking net zero seriously, you're playing your part, and you're not just saying you're going to do these things, but you have concrete actions.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of quite savvy about greenwash nowadays, a lot of people.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that they ask a lot of questions, I think, as well. Potential recruits at all levels are asking lots of more questions at the end of an interview, trying to get a sense of what you can offer. So you almost feel like you're being interviewed as much as you're providing an interview. The other thing to mention is that I think candidates, by and large, are looking to make an impact in what they do. So if you're able to tie their job role into the overall mission of the company, so EDF's mission is about helping Britain to achieve net zero. And EDF obviously has lots of opportunity to do that because our generation portfolio, our contact with customers through the supply business, the advice that we're able to provide, and that sort of whole system approach that we have, I think it's quite easy. And it was for me when I was joining EDF, actually, a really motivating factor was that opportunity to make an impact across the British energy system and not just on behalf of the company.
Oh, that's interesting. How does risk management fit into sustainability, particularly the risk of doing nothing?
I think there's a couple of ways of thinking about the interplay between risk and sustainability. First of all, where we started this podcast was talking about the UK's net zero target and having it enshrined in law. And the UK is now one of almost, I think, hundreds of countries who have now signed up to net zero, and you can see the proportion of emissions worldwide that are covered by countries that have net zero targets is now up around 70%, I believe. So you have to expect that with those kind of commitments at an economy level, at a global level, that we're going to get to net zero. It might not happen as fast as people like me would hope, but we are on that trajectory. It is already happening. The energy transition is in place. So as a savvy business, you have to expect that transition to happen, and you have to expect opportunities to emerge, but also risks that emerge with that as well. What's the impact going to be on power prices? What's it going to mean in terms of, the shift in the generation mix that we have in the UK and the intermittency of renewables? How does that impact different businesses? And it's important that businesses are aware of those transition risks. And also, on the other side, it's the physical risks of climate change that businesses need to be concerned about. We are unfortunately sort of seeing the impacts of those catastrophic floods in Eastern Europe, Central and Eastern Europe over the last few months. And it's been eye-opening. Those kind of extreme weather events, other extreme weather events are really hitting home for companies that, their assets, their business plans are being impacted by climate change as it's happening now, and that's going to continue to happen over the years ahead. So again, you need to take account of those physical risks when planning for the future as a prudent business as well.
Ed, could you tell us a little bit about the sustainability services that you actually offer to your customers?
Yeah, so I suppose being a net zero orientated energy supplier, we like to think we've pretty much got everything covered in terms of our proposition to customers. In fact, we've just relaunched our graphical representation of our product offerings as a net zero wheel, demonstrating that kind of all-round coverage. Although, as mentioned previously, giving customers work to date, there's kind of no one way to start engaging on net zero. It generally starts with a supply contract for us. And we tend to build our supply contracts to ensure that they can fully support and facilitate net zero initiatives that our customers want to employ. And that includes things like, having the widest choice of zero carbon energy options available in the market, pre-designed sleeving clauses for corporate power purchase agreements, and the option of pass-through of imbalance charges to assist with that kind of on-site generation issue. And that contract can be supported through our metering business, providing a full range of standard, sub and smart metering solutions, giving customers access to dependable services and the data that they need to make decisions on energy projects moving forward. We have a partner in Abanami that can help our customers design a comprehensive energy estate strategy, incorporating things like sustainable transport with slow, fast and rapid electric vehicle charging infrastructure. For several of our very largest customers, we've helped them develop and deliver significant corporate power purchase agreements, fully balanced, shaped and integrated into their electricity supply contract. EDF Renewables, as you might expect, design and deliver renewable projects, an obvious specific customer-related focus on on-site solar now. And we've got financial delivery models following a power purchase agreement or a customer-funded route for those. And we've got that cross between a more traditional mechanical engineering projects delivered by Dalkia, part of EDF Group, and the growing area of flexibility service where we're the largest grid scale provider. So a pretty comprehensive list of different net zero proposition.
I mean, taking the example of your own experience at EDF, what do you think the best place to begin when it comes to implementing a comprehensive sustainability journey?
So I think a good place to start is often with a materiality assessment, which sounds jargonistic, but it's really quite simple. It's just about understanding what matters to you as a business and doing that in quite a systematic way. And there's an acronym to understand how to go about a materiality assessment in the right way, and it's DISCO. So for the D, it's about definition. So it's defining the purpose and what's in scope. So are you doing it for just one business unit, one entity, one country? How far are you taking your materiality assessment? Then I is identify. So you identify the topics within sustainability, everything that could matter to you as a business and your stakeholders. And you try and be as broad ranging as possible in that to leave no stone unturned. Then S is stakeholders. So you talk to your staff, you talk to people within the business, your exec team, your board, but also externally, your customers and political stakeholders, people who have a view and an impact on your sustainability performance as a business. And then C is consultation with those people. So asking them what they think is the most important things within the sustainability remit that your business should be working on. And then finally, it's organisation. So you organise all of those things, you plot them on a graph about how important they are versus their impact on your business. And that starts to give you a feel for priority and how you should be expending your resources when it comes to developing your ESG strategy or sustainability plan or whatever you want to call it. I think starting with the priorities is often a good thing.
So do you think it's important to have targets independently verified, such as the SBTi?
Yes, I think it is good to have third-party verification of targets and ambition, and there's a multitude of organisations that can provide that service. SBTi, I think, is one of the most well-known. I think it's important that their methodologies are science-based. That's the thing that brings confidence. The ultimate game here is about limiting global temperatures, and what these third-party organisations should do is have methodologies which basically tell you what your fair share is and how quickly you should be curbing your emissions to be in line with your sector performance and therefore doing your bit to limit global temperatures along that basis. So the science-based nature of it is really important. It also provides a benchmark for third-party stakeholders. So you see increasingly, government entities, private sector entities, when they are going out to tender, sort of specifying that they require these kind of verification services to
before even doing business with you, sort of thing.
Sometimes, it depends on the nature of the contract or the nature of the product, but it can be within the criteria that they are selecting on as well. So it's not just pre-qualification; it's also in the selection process. Also, these things make you have to return and report and provide data, and it almost sort of keeps you regularly checking in on your progress towards the target, as well as just establishing the target in the first place. So that they are useful. It is worth saying that they are you still need to look beneath the rubber stamp of an SBTi validation, and you need to sort of look at what the company is actually doing and whether it's making progress, and are there assumptions within their targets, for example, which are questionable, or do they rely on a future policy change which might not materialize? So there's still room within it that I think if you're doing your due diligence on a company, you should look beneath just a rubber stamp. It's not a be all and end all.
And Ed?
Yeah, probably just to echo Tom's points, really. I think we're probably seeing that more evolve from that prerequisite in terms of when we're going out to businesses to tender for new organisations to join our supply kind of portfolio. You know, they're pretty well versed on accreditation insurance, just making sure that they're dealing with suppliers that take net zero as seriously as they do. We're probably seeing a little bit of creep into some other areas. So things like the UK Green Building Councils are probing kind of deeper into supplier credentials and legitimacy of things like product, fuel mix and carbon certification. As Tom mentions, you know, that kind of due diligence element of it, moving beyond just verifying that they have those targets, that they're keeping up with them and making progress that they stated against them and delivering over time. We haven't quite seen that evolve into a kind of a contractual requirement on us, but I can kind of see that developing in that space.
I mean, having good data underpins energy and sustainability, reporting, measurement and verification of project successes and procurement strategies. Yet Scope 3 is largely out of an organisation's control. I mean, how do you advise customers, or how does EDF itself approach this?
For EDF, Scope 3 is basically all of our carbon footprint. So it's something we care about a lot. It's the focus for our carbon reduction activities. And there's basically two main sources of our Scope 3 emissions. One in the products that we sell, largely gas, our gas supply for homes and for businesses. And secondly, our supply chain when it comes to particularly some of our large infrastructure projects, nuclear new build, for example. So when it comes to the first one, you know, I guess the quickest way for us to reduce those emissions would be to divest and not supply gas anymore. But that would probably be an irresponsible thing to do, we'd argue, because as predominantly an electricity company, we feel like we're really well placed to help all of our customers to transition from gas to electricity if that's appropriate, or other forms of energy. We are experts in being able to support businesses in that. So we should take responsibility for those emissions and help our customers on that journey. Mm-hmm. So, but we are quite deliberate in that, and we benchmark ourselves against other suppliers to make sure that what we think is true is actually true, and we can help customers on that journey. And then for supply chain, that's a really complex task. I think the most important thing is that you just start somewhere, and that you start to create the data set, which is going to help you get a better handle of where your emissions lie within your supply chain. And you can do that through things like spend-based data as a first step. Then it's about engagement with your supply chain, making sure that you're doing the surveys with them to understand how mature they are in terms of their own sustainability agenda. And then finally, I think as a large company, recognizing that we've got some influence and setting out our expectations over a long time horizon. You can't bounce the supply chain into implementing standards next week, which are often complex and take time to deliver. So we'll do that in collaboration, I think, with our suppliers.
And Ed, what's your opinion from your large customers?
Yeah, so I suppose on the very larger side of our customer portfolio, I think they probably do have a little bit more ingrained with their supply chain, a little bit more control, perhaps in certain sectors and certain industries. We kind of see a little bit of a two-pronged approach. There's a little bit around conformity, so using some of the verification methodology and insisting that their supply chain signs up to those, and obviously then utilise those schemes to deliver for them, in effect, in terms of their Scope 3 emission reduction. And I suppose the other side is assistance as well. So I think there's a lot that can be done. You know, we're talking about large organisations who have got pretty well established energy management teams, sustainability teams. They know this stuff really well, and they're obviously dealing with potentially smaller tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers to them. And I think they're supporting that supply chain with access to information, some guidance, potentially group purchasing power. Can be incredibly beneficial. You know, we've seen a few organisations go down the route of trying to create supply chain corporate power purchase agreements that everyone can benefit from, heading them up as a large corporate organisation, and kind of can see that developing in the future.
So how can businesses prepare for the future? What do they need to discuss in their 2025 and midterm budget discussions?
I think I'd pick out 2 or 3 things that businesses might need to be aware of when it comes to their sustainability programs in the future. Firstly, I talked about earlier the regulatory landscape and the requirement on businesses to become more transparent, and that is only going in one direction. And we should see the publication of the Sustainability Disclosure Standards in the UK around the turn of the year, which will be a new reporting framework based on the European standard, which is called the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. We'll see our own version of that implemented in the UK, which will mean more reporting metrics, more data collection, probably more auditing associated with that. But the detail of that will be quite important for businesses to get their heads around.
This is for larger businesses?
This will be for larger businesses, yes. Alongside that, we'll probably see a requirement for more transparency around transition plans as well. So it's less of a static view about what your impact is when it comes to sustainability, but more about how you're going to change that over time, and frameworks for how you do that likely to be introduced. And then when it comes to energy supply, there's been quite a debate around the use of REGOs, Renewable Energy Guarantees of Origin, those certificates which I guess give you confidence that you've got a renewable-backed supply. And there's a debate, I suppose, about how well linked they are to actual renewable generation and whether they're additional in encouraging more renewables to enter the UK grid. And we should see some opinions from the Greenhouse Gas Protocol working groups next year, which will, I guess, have a bearing on how companies use REGOs in the future. So those two will be, things to look out for in the new year, I'd say.
And finally, where should people go, Ed, to find out more about this?
So you can visit us on our website, edfenergy.com/large business, or you can visit us on our LinkedIn page at EDF Business Solutions.
So thank you both for joining us, and for the latest news, views and opinions on the energy market, go to theenergist.com. Thank you for listening.